Hey, this is Tad Kinchla from Blues Traveler. You're listening to my weekly mixtape with Brian Colburn. Catch the show. It's amazing. I just had an unbelievable time, and Brian is probably the best interview I've ever had in my life.
Welcome to My Weekly Mixtape, a podcast that takes the classic mixtape approach to building a modern playlist. I'm your host, Brian Colburn. When I started podcasting in 2018, one of my goals was to talk to the musicians who have made the music that is the soundtrack to my life. And over the years, I've slowly but surely made that goal a reality. And tonight, I get to check off a bucket list band that, for anyone who knows me personally, knows this group is part of my personal Mount Rushmore of music. So without further ado, I am honored to welcome Tad Kinchla, bassist for Blues Traveler, to My Weekly Mixtape. Tad, thank you so much for joining me tonight, man.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure. It's good to hear your voice again. Obviously, we've crossed paths in the past, but maybe not in a talking environment.
Yeah, we did the show back in 2009 at the Bergen Pack in Englewood, New Jersey. It was an absolute blast, one of my highlights of my musical career. And now this is one of the highlights of my podcasting one. So,
all right. Well, happy to be part of both.
Well, I'd like to start by asking the same question I ask all of my first-time guests, and that is, what does the word mixtape mean to you?
Well, I feel like I was born in an era where that was actually a thing. You know, back in the day when technology wasn't quite as readily available, you would, kind of have to curate your own, all of us listen to music growing up, all my friends, and based on what you're listening to and your favorite songs and things that kind of were important to you or things that you might want to share with someone else, you would have to literally go. And it usually involved two cassette players, one playing and then the other had a record feature. And you would actually, in real time, mix a tape together of songs that, depending on how you wanted to convey the tape, what it was for, because there's obviously various levels of mixtapes. You would kind of, record individual songs onto a tape, and then you would actually write in on the label on the cassette. And then if you got fancy, you'd have a Sharpie and you'd like do some doodling, and then you'd give it to someone. And when I envision mixtapes, that's kind of where I go with that, standard audio cassette tapes.
Awesome. Well, I'd like to start actually in the middle of Blues Traveler's story, because you joined the band in 1999 after the sad passing of Bobby Sheehan. And being that Chan Kinchla, the band's lead guitarist, is your brother, was there any trepidation or pause within the rest of the group when you joined?
That's a good question. It was just to give a little backstory to that. It was kind of an interesting time. I shouldn't say interesting. It was kind of an emotional time for everyone, because I was good friends with Bobby, and obviously the band started and formed with Bobby and, plowed forward and had their successes with Bob, with Four and all that. And then they tried out 5 bass players, and I was one of them. I happened to still be playing. I kind of went a circuitous route. I went to Brown and played lacrosse and got hooked back into music because I'd always played music. And then I was in a 3-piece that actually moved to New York after graduating and started playing. And so my chops were like, still there because I was playing at the time. And so I was one of the 5 guys they asked to try out. And it was weird because my tryout was the first gig in New York after Bobby's passing. So it was kind of a cathartic reunion of people right after Bobby had passed. So it was the first time everyone had the chance to kind of air things out. So it was, it was kind of, it was a tough gig to play, I should say, but went over well. The guys they waited 2 weeks to tell me, which was really classy. I think Jan told him, he was like, let him sweat it out. And then Dave, for sure, the manager, another Princeton high school graduate, called me up. Not even Chan. It was like they had their manager call me, and I got the gig. And I have to say, having known the guys for a long time, I was already friends with them. So I we're all real sarcastic bastards, and we all get along really well and have the same sense of humor. But I never really sensed anything but, acceptance into the band. And really the fans as well just made it that transition, because it's a major transition. I don't play like Bobby, and it's, kind of, we moved in a different direction, because I told them straight up, like, if you want to get Bobby, hire a studio guy that can cop Bobby, because I don't play like Bobby. We're just different players. And with that being said, the band decided and kind of gelled together and said, let's move on. And the first thing we did was write an album. So initially I jump in and I throw these tunes I have, and right away I'm in the fold. And it was, I never sensed any kind of resentment. I'm sure there were tough times as far as personally, just moving on, playing with a different player, and things that, unsaid things that bands get to have. So it was nothing but, acceptance from the guys. And I never felt it. If it was there, I never felt it,
Well, the album that you're talking about, the first album that you and keyboardist Ben Wilson was on board for, was 2001's Bridge. And that album is filled with classic tracks like Back in the Day, Just for Me, All Hands, Sadly a Fiction, all songs that have been in the band's live rotation since the album's release. I've always considered the Bridge album to be the beginning of the quote-unquote 2.0 era of the band, because you and Ben in the mix gave this band new avenues to explore musically, and I think this album really capitalizes on that. Now, you personally wrote 2 songs for the album, the lead single Girl Inside My Head and the live staple You Reach Me. Can you talk about your first writing contributions for the band and how you approached writing music with Blues Traveler in mind?
Yeah. Well, both of those were ideas I had been kicking around, one of which was in a different songwriter friend of mine. We had just started Girl, and I had gotten the lyrics down and kind of the melodies and stuff. So it was one of those things where, like, I didn't know what my contribution was going to be when we went down to write. Like, I didn't know any process that Blues Traveler had. I'd seen him in a studio, but not, a writing process. And sure enough, we just get up and the first day and make kind of a schedule. And it's like a round robin where each day the next person contributes something. And we do about 3 or 4 cycles where each guy contributes, 3 or 4 songs. And then we go over the songs we like best and then do like a rough of those, and then have producers listen to them, not knowing anything about who wrote whatever. And then we get like the 12 best out of them. So I was like super psyched, because they're like, hey, tomorrow's your day. And I was like, what? So I went home and kind of, got the acoustic guitar and kind of made a little form out of Girl Inside My Head and brought it in. And John was like, oh, this is great. Let's do this. And then, of course, he takes the lyrics and adds about twice as many and then like kind of rewrites the thing. But that's just kind of the process. He's the singer. He's entitled to his own, interpretation of any of that. And it's always kind of been that way. But I was really struck by how democratic the process was, how it's like, we're all for one for all. We each get a turn. And then, Reach Me was a little riff. I had played in, I guess, a band in college. I think we made a song out of it or something, but it was just a warm-up thing that I had always done. And I did it for John, and he was like, oh, wait, keep doing that, and we kind of it was kind of old bluegrass style where I just kept playing the thing, and then everyone kind of picked up some parts, and then I just shifted and kind of changed some chords. We all kind of shifted, and it was a really organic, cool process. I mean, I was just super stoked to be contributing, but then to be actually like within the first 3 days being, kind of honing in and doing writing and that experience with the guys was really, really impressive. Not only in that it was, so organic, but how kind of shared a process it was. It was really a cool experience.
Well, also in 2001 was one of the most transcendent concert experiences of my life. December 16th, just a few months post 9/11, the band took the stage at the Roseland Ballroom along with Michael Franti and Spearhead and led a 4-hour celebration of all things New York, including John's spine-tingling rendition of the Star-Spangled Banner, which could be heard on your live album, What You and I Have Been Through, as well as bringing first responders up on stage for a rendition of The Path along with Radioactive from Spearhead. That show will forever be one of my favorite concert moments, and I'd like to know what it was like for the band to step up on stage a few months post 9/11 in the heart of New York City and try to bring some levity to the hardest moment in that city's history.
Yeah. Hey, that's a good recollection. I'm glad that you were part of that. Yeah, that was a pretty, I think we didn't really like realize we had been on tour. We were in New Mexico when 9/11 happened. And then we made our way back. And I remember we were all sitting up front in the bus because we'd all lived in New York for years. And I was still living in Brooklyn over in Williamsburg. And, just to see the skyline was just so, kind of profoundly humbling to come up and just realize what happened firsthand. And so we were all, everyone was emotional who lived in New York, who had friends. Mm-hmm. And, it was just such a kind of weird time. But to be able to have a gig on the books there, especially with Fronte, it was such a great tour with them. But to get up in Roseland and be surrounded by Jersey and Connecticut and New York people was really special. It definitely, it was something we really enjoyed doing. I think it was a couple days later where we looked back and I was like, wow, that was kind of like, an interesting, kind of a deep thing to happen, that we happened to have a gig there and, in that time. So it was, a great place to be, especially Roseland with such deep roots with the band, it was kind of like coming home.
Well, being I mentioned that song, The Path, that song was initially part of a concept album that the band recorded called Decisions of the Sky, that in 2000, week by week, the band released as I'm going to sound really old school here, but as a free MP3 on the band's webpage. There were talks at one point of there being an official CD release of this album with a fifth unreleased song, but it never came to fruition. And on the band's 25 compilation, 3 of those songs, 12 Swords, The Sun and the Storm, and Traveler's Suite, made the track listing, but The Path was omitted. The liner notes acknowledged it, but I've always wondered why The Path wasn't included. And in this age of digital releases, more importantly, will the world ever see Decisions of the Sky released as it was originally intended?
That's a good question on why that was never released. It was kind of above my pay grade. It was a concept album John had been kicking around, and we actually, we went in. Recording that was probably one of the hardest things I did with the band, as far as like kicking back to my old sight reading and kind of band times when, or orchestra, as far as having like music. I had, deep notes because the songs were like 12, 15 minutes with like a change. It wasn't a standard format. It was just like a section, another section, another section, another section. So without writing down and noting it, because we don't work that way. No one writes, right, sheet music and say, hey, play this. It's rock bands don't really do that. So, but there were a lot of parts. And so there was just like squirrely little notes about how to, that I recognize and how, oh, this is coming up, or this, like open E, open G, just little like flags that, kind of cued me on where things were going. But we sat down and cranked that out in like 2 days.
Wow.
And it was a lot of music. I mean, we had worked on parts, but we just kind of nailed it. It was getting in there. Like once it starts, we kind of, if there weren't really many fixes, but yeah, I digress. Sorry. As far as why that didn't get released, I do not know specifically. It might be a John question where he didn't want to do it partially. It wanted to be one thing. And if it couldn't be one thing, he didn't want to do it all together. So I don't have a legitimate answer for you, but that's about all I can offer.
Well, another thing that happened that night in New York City was the band played a version of Runaround in a minor key. And this version was entitled Fucked Run. And it was played live for several years and then kind of just fell off the live map. And I assumed in 2007, when the band released Cover Yourself, that I was finally going to get a studio version of this amazingly dark and melodic take on one of the band's biggest hits. But alas, the band took the song in a different direction from now both versions of Runaround. So my question is there a studio version of Fucked Run out there? And if so, will it ever see the light of day?
Yeah. That's a fun one to play. In fact, we tried to revisit it a couple times, and we actually have randomly, like John, we will come in and John will be like, hey, let's just make that transition like Fucked Run and then go to, something else in G, play Prof or something. And I'm just trying to think of the last time, probably within the last year or two, we've hit it, but we've never recorded it.
Wow.
Yeah, it's never been recorded by us. Maybe next time we get in the studio, we should just lay something down so we have it. But it's kind of like Run is such a kind of iconic pop song, success song. It's kind of like juicing, a stone where you're like, hey, maybe they want to hear another version that we just totally changed the melody and played in minor keys. I think that's the idea, is that Run has gotten a lot of success for the band, and it's maybe bad juju to try to re-record it for that purpose,
Yeah, from another musician standpoint, though, hearing that being reimagined in a dark light, the minor key gives it that dark feel. And when John holds the high note for the chorus, it just kind of sends it into this different musical place. And to me, it really makes you focus on the lyrics more than the pop version, which you're kind of up and dancing and enjoying. And I think that was the part of that song that was so interesting to me.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. I mean, in a way, it's almost too bad that we weren't able to throw different lyrics to just the four chord, minor dirge, because it's kind of cool. And John's melody on it is really cool.
Yeah.
It's an interesting, I don't know who came up with that. I think it was already in place maybe by the time I joined. They had like been tossing it around as like kind of a, hey, let's start it normal and then go weird.
Well, in 2003, the band released what could very well be my favorite Blues Traveler album, which, depending on the day, it's neck and neck with Travelers and Thieves, The Incredible Truth Be Told. And I'd love to talk about this album for a couple of minutes, if you don't mind.
Sure.
And the first song I'd like to talk about is Can't See Why, because as a bass player myself, I have to give love to my favorite bass line on the album. That bass line is absolute fire.
Oh, thanks.
When you're contributing songs to the band, other examples from the album, Let Her and Let Go, Partner in Crime, did you write those songs with a specific bass line in mind, or were you kind of writing the music and chords first and then designing the bass line after the song was kind of in the band's hands?
Let Her and Let Go was more chordal, but Partner in Crime and I Can't See Why, both of those were written like riff style. Like I wrote the riff and then showed Chan, and I actually pared back some of the bass parts to not be playing the riff and have Chan carry it. So it was all like old school, like, kind of Zeppelin, where you got the riff and then you built the song around it.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, Let Her and Let Go also has one of my favorite lyrics of any Blues Traveler song ever. And that line is, "You never get the one you dreamed of. You get to dream with the one you get." According to the liner notes, both you and John wrote the lyrics together for this one. So I am just curious who came up with that line.
Oh, that's vintage John Popper.
Yeah, that line, the first time I heard it, I'll tell you right now, my wife and I were driving through Disney World. We were not engaged at the time. A few weeks later, we would be. And that line came on, and I literally held my arm up to her and said, holy shit, the hair on my arm stood up from that lyric.
Oh, and wow.
It's just one that always resonated with me.
Yeah, John, he's a good songwriter. He writes good lyrics, man. It'll surprise. Yeah, sometimes I will play a song, we'll even record it. We'll be playing it live, like, the next year or 2 years later. And I'll like choose that night to like listen to the lyrics fully. And I'll be like, oh shit, I didn't know he was saying that. Because you get, it's just like my wife and I, when she listens to a song, she hears all the lyrics. So she sings all these songs. And I'm like, how do you know the lyrics? Because when I'm listening to songs, I'm listening to totally different things. Like, the beats, bass parts a lot, like a riff, like good, like melodic single line stuff. And I'm totally like, I could literally hear a song and not know what the chorus was from the lyrics. And so it's an interesting thing, the way, songs are written like that.
Well, Thinnest of Air is another track on that album that's maintained its spot in the band's live sets over the years, and it's probably one that my wife and I agree are one of the highlights from this incredible album. With so many albums to pull from in your discography, and an obvious bank of hit songs that really can no longer be denied during your live shows, how does the band decide on which songs make it past the quote-unquote album tour cycle into the quote unquote, this song's here for the long run mentality?
These are good questions, man. I didn't know I'd have to think. So it's an interesting process, actually. I mean, you're bang on in that respect. Like we go through that process where, I mean, we've played long enough and together and recorded enough. We have good sense about it, but like when you're writing the song in the first couple, 2 or 3 albums, you didn't know what would stick. You know, it's like throwing pasta against the wall and just, because sometimes if it was too layered, a recording or the song was too produced and didn't have independently strong parts, you'd play it live and be like, oh, wow, that sucks. Or like there were real heavy harmonies that at the time we couldn't hit, because John's up in a different register and Ben and I couldn't like try to get to them. And then there's others that aren't really prevalent on the album. They're just kind of, but live just kick ass. It'll have a couple like bass and guitar parts together or something, or like just, you play it live and you're like, oh my God, that was really fun. And people seem to like respond to it. So we don't have the formula down and, kudos to anyone who does, but that is a process that we go through. And I don't think at the time Thinnest of Air we were really thinking, it happened so fast writing. It's not like we sit, write the parts and then like experiment with it on the road for a while. We're not really that kind of band. We go in, write, and then get a producer and then record. So we're literally still tweaking our part as we're recording. I've definitely had it where like Ben or me or Ben can overdub, but like the rhythm section, we'll go in and we'll have a first takedown and I'm like, oh, wait, let's do something else. And I'll listen back to the first take and be like, I got to change the part. So it's like more locked in. So we're literally writing the parts. So Thinnest of Air, I think we were, it was a quick song and a lot of little intricacies. We were still thinking about the song while we're doing it. And it didn't really dawn on us that would actually end up being like a good live song. And the formula for, what stays playable is really like how it performs and the reaction from the crowd and also the way we feel playing it. And there are several songs that we've like, indefinitely thrown out as a live option. But most of them, the first time you play it, whether it's going to be an okay live one. And then if you play it a whole cycle, a lot of times if it's new, we'll play it an entire tour, then it'll be in our bones and we'll be able to be like, reference it whenever we want. And if you can like play it 2 years later and have the same response, then that's kind of a keeper.
Well, one last song I want to talk about from Truth Be Told, and then I promise we'll move on. The powerful ballad Sweet and Broken that was co-written by John Popper and Chris Barron of the Spin Doctors. A few episodes ago, Aaron Comas of the Spin Doctors was a guest on the show, and we talked about the early New York City days that included the Spinning Traveler shows and such. But to this day, the bands are still extremely close. Can you talk about the relationships that the two bands have continued to forge since you joined in 1999?
Yeah, well, to give some reference, Chris went to Princeton High School. So we're all high school buddies. And when the band decided to make the jump and go to New York, Chris actually rolled into New York as well. And he was kind of doing singer-songwriter stuff. But, we've all known each other from back in high school. And, that bond is, if you're high school guys going to New York and playing in the same scene, like you're about as close as you can get because you're going to hold on to those friendships. And they clearly, Spin Doctors, I mean, it was like lightning striking twice in the same spot with Spin Doctors and Blues Traveler coming from Princeton, right, both getting hits, in the same, 2 or 3 year period. I mean, that was just like, no one expected that. And it was very lucky and chance had to do with it and talent. But Chris has been, we've probably haven't gone more than like 2 or 3 years since 2000 without playing a gig with Chris or the Spin Doctors. I mean, I think that we're irrevocably tied together via the 90s. And also the fact that if the name comes up, we're like, yes, let's do a gig with them. Let's try to make it happen. And we're still, I'm trying to think of a lot. We just played with him, not all that long ago. He came out in was it the fall? Our last tour, our spring tour. He actually opened a bunch of shows doing playing guitar and singing solo. And it was actually really cool because he's gotten really good at guitar. And it was really fun. I mean, there's something really cool about seeing John and Chris on stage. Like it brings back memories of when I saw them, when I was in like, 7th grade or whatever. And they were at the church across from the high school playing gigs.
Well, while we're talking about co-writing, I want to jump ahead to 2015's Blow Up the Moon, which is a very unique album in the Blues Traveler discography because every song on the album was a collaboration, along with artists such as NSYNC's JC Chasez, the Dirty Heads, Hanson, Plain White Tees, and Bowling for Soup, just to name a few. The title track, Blow Up the Moon, which features both JC Chasez and 303, happens to be my kid's personal favorite Blues Traveler song. Yeah. So I'm just pulling that one out as an example. But as a whole, can you talk about how these collaborations kind of came to fruition and maybe how those sessions differed for you versus other albums in the Blues Traveler catalog?
Yeah, that was an interesting, we had a management team that was they're out in Vegas and they were a little bit green. And I mean, if you look at the list of like, collaborations, it's like, someone took, a wall full of band names, printed all over it and just randomly threw darts. There's no like, I mean, it's about as random. You couldn't have bet on who we were going to do a collaboration with and been right. It was really interesting. So our management at the time, I think those were contacts they had made. So we didn't know this at all, but they didn't have a huge portfolio of people to call. So they just called some people. I think one of our manager's assistant was somehow related to JC Chasez. And, the 303, I'm not sure. I think there was a gig that one of their openers did with them, but they just called up a bunch of people and we took the yeses, and we found this out kind of after the fact, because we weren't putting in calls and we just kind of went with their concept. Like it's going to be random, but like we feel like it's going to be an interesting, kind of collaborations. And that writing process was really cool. We traveled to each place and then we'd like rent a studio and basically meet the people, sit down, like have coffee and lunch maybe, and then start like writing back, hey, any ideas? And it was literally like whoever played the first thing, we'd be like, okay, let's try that.
Nice.
And sometimes it was us or John being like, here's an idea. And he had some lyrics and they would do lyrics first and then we'd fill in the music. And then some others were like, here's a couple chords that I was thinking this could be really cool. And then we'd get the chord structure down. And then John and the other singer would like kind of work on lyrics together.
Well, while we're on the subject of unique albums, I mentioned this one earlier. Listeners of My Weekly Mixtape will recall episode 36 because John O'Manson was the guest on that show. And we talked about his collaboration with the band on The Mountains Win Again for the 2007 release Cover Yourself, an album that the band took their biggest hits and re-recorded them with new arrangements. Can you talk about the mindset behind taking some of the band's most beloved songs and rearranging them, and then how the fans reacted to hearing these songs under a new lens?
Yeah, that was, we were in Austin at the time and Jim Eno produced that. He's the drummer from Spoon and has a studio in Austin. I think he still does. But anyway, it was really a cool time. Our management, I think here's the deal. It was like we had recorded something and John was like, I don't have it in me to do a full writing session and doing a whole album full of material. Like right now, I'm like, he was just, we were tired, we were touring a lot. So the management came up with these like, well, what about if we like just re-envisioned, your own stuff? And we were like, John was like, sweet, perfect. He was like, no lyrical work. And so I think that was where that brainchild came from. It was like, this is the least amount of work I can do, but be creative at the same time. So it turned into a really fun project. But I think it was like, that was the kind of the kernel of where that idea came from. And then we would, kind of just sit and throw out ideas of what style to play the song in, and then just kind of reimagine it. I think most of the time we stayed in the same key and didn't go like major minor, like that Run thing. But it was super cool. Like kind of basically you're writing a new song, but just applying the other, the old lyrics to it. So boiling it down, that's about what we did. And it was a really fun process. Fortunately and unfortunately, those songs really didn't stick live. We did them a couple times and it didn't resonate really. I think there were some disappointed people when we did it. So a lot of those, I don't think we play any of those versions anymore live. But it's a good point to bring up. Maybe coming up this fall, we can maybe implement some of those.
Now, Blues Traveler's always been one of my favorite live bands, and I don't think we can discuss this band without a little bit of a focus on the live shows. And at one point, when you went to see Blues Traveler in the early 2000s, there was never a guarantee that you'd hear Runaround, Hook, or But Anyway in a set list, but you could always expect something deeper, like Business as Usual from Straight On Till Morning, Conquer Me from Save Our Soul, or Optimistic Thought mashed up with a sprinkling of Kenny Rogers' The Gambler.
Yeah.
And I remember a run in November of 2002 where I caught the band several nights in a row at Irving Plaza in New York City, where the band did a no repeat run.
Yeah.
And to me, that really lends itself to the jam band community mindset, something I've always felt that Blues Traveler embraced in live shows. So how does the decision come within the band to craft set lists, and has that jam band mindset evolved over the years in terms of what songs you guys plan to play at a given show?
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, the times have changed, just like, the way music, bands don't make money selling albums anymore. They make money touring, or, you could be in the middle of the outback in Australia and have 5 million views of a song you wrote in your house. Like, things have changed in the industry, let's say that. So back in the day, like when I first joined, we were doing those 2 sets a night, and there was a real hunger for that. And I think we were more positioned in the jam band scene, having come out of it and kind of helped start it, let's say, with the Horde and all that. And like our friends and peers were like, Dave Matthews and Fish and Mo and, all these bands widespread. So we were, I think, more positioned with that then. And the 2 sets, the people coming, like, I remember we were up in like upstate New York. And I remember like we started at 10, but we played like an hour and a half first set, which was the shorter one, like a 30-minute break. Second set started at like 12:15 and then it was like 2:30 when we ended. And like people were still there. It didn't empty. So nowadays, if we got out and played a 4 hours, it would be like a quarter of the people still there. And especially if it's past like 10:30 at night, because like most of there's a lot of parents and responsible people that come see us, and they kind of, I have to say, it's shifted. We go in, clearly there are songs we feel an obligation to play because there are people with that expectation, and we're very fortunate to be still playing music. So obviously we're going to cater to that kind of mindset. But as of now, it's really shortened up. People want to see one set, and be out of there in time to like get a night's sleep. It's not quite the party that it used to be. And we still have the jam band mentality in that each of us takes a turn writing a set on cycle since basically I joined the band. It's been the same 5, it's 5 of us in rotation. Actually, I can swear, right?
Oh, yeah, by all means.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's Big Cock, Tiny Blowjob. And that's been, and it's hysterical because we say it's almost like a business term now, and we forget it's just such like ludicrous, like, what are you talking about? But that's the order in which we've been going for since I joined. So for 20 years, and probably before that, they were doing the same. And each night, like, there are requisite songs that we're going to put in there if John's voice is, up for it. I mean, the unfortunate thing is John had he has great pipes, but his early songs, he really went for it up high. So a lot of those songs, he's like, oh, dude, I cannot, like, there's no way I can hit that. So we kind of have to retire some songs. Sometimes we try switching keys, but we've retired songs that are, not, he's not able to hit with as much confidence as he wants. But the jam band stuff, we still have a different set with the kind of requisite songs, the framework. And then there's probably, I'd say, like 3 to 4 audibles at this point where we're at. We're playing like 90 minutes or so, 75 to 90. It's been kind of, we were just out Big Ed Todd. It was about 75 to 90. So there's 3 or 4 songs that are audibles each night that will shift up. And, you tend to get comfortable sometimes because it's a different venue. You're like, hey, that worked last night. Let's do that again. But in general, we try to keep cycling in old songs and some surprises and maybe some weird covers and, do what we can. But we're definitely not in the jam band scene like where Fish is now. They've kind of almost expanded upon their jamming, where we've kind of tightened up our show. And it's not, it's more of playing to the audience. Our audience isn't the 2-set, leave at 2 a.m, fan base anymore.
Well, talking about the band's biggest hits that you say are staples of the show, Runaround, Hook, The Mountains Win Again, But Anyway, Carolina Blues. Is there a song that the band kind of universally considers to be the definitive Blues Traveler hit? Because you can ask different people, and some people will say Runaround, some people will say Hook, some people will say The Mountains Win Again. So I'm curious what that thought is in the band.
I would say But Anyway is the most definitive, iconic Blues Traveler song. It was written a long time ago in high school. It's kind of intelligent lyrics, but still light, and it's a 2-chord vamp. And that's what the band used to play 3-hour sets at Nightingale's, and still with only, not a whole lot of songs to play. And they would pick songs where it was 2-chord vamps and somehow kept it interesting, and that's a definitive characteristic of kind of the band being able to play just very simple songs, but kind of make it interesting. And each player kind of plays their instrument in that song, and it's kind of an integral part. However, it's not a mind-blowing crazy. I mean, other than John maybe just freaking out. But I think But Anyway to me is the kind of, integral, the iconic Blues Traveler song.
Now, in a Blues Traveler live show, the sets do change in some ways every night, as do the segues between the songs, because the band kind of mashes songs together. And as a musician, I've always wondered how the musical conversation unfolds on stage between the 5 of you to decide when the next change is about to take place.
Well, it's a musical conversation. We write our sets, and then we have a bunch of figures and symbols that mean there's a wave where we just hold the note. There's a ... where it's a count in. And then there's the into, which is a greater than, or a less than symbol or whatever.
Yes.
And those are completely open-ended. So we don't really discuss it. It's just oh, okay, we're jamming in there. If there's a key change, we might say oh, on Bren's cue. But that's about, other than that, it's just kind of a conversation with the music. And we've just gotten kind of good at being able to read each other. And it's just, it changes. Some nights it's horrendous. 2 of us will be up in D, and, so I'll still be oh, we've gone, you'll look around and get some weird looks. But then other nights it's just we'll decide to break it down, and I'll stop playing, or Ben will stop playing, and then Chan and I will start coming in, and we'll rework a riff from the middle of the song to the start. So it's a pretty cool process. And it's one of the things I look forward to the most kind of in each night is where we're going to end up when we go down that path.
Now, over the years, the band has incorporated a ton of amazing covers into the set that almost feel that they're as much of the band's legacy as the hits themselves. A few that come to mind is the band's rendition of Charlie Daniels' The Devil Went Down to Georgia, and in more recent years, Sublime's What I Got and Radiohead's Creep. How do you guys decide which songs are quote-unquote live show worthy?
Usually, I'd say most of all, it's got to be John's being comfortable singing it and pulling it off. That's kind of the main thing. We try to stay, it's tough for any band. You want to play approachable songs that, are inclusive to the audience, but aren't the give me's. So a cool song, something that isn't the single from the album, maybe the second single or something. But it's important that in something like Sublime, you're reaching out and saying, hey, this person might know that song. This is us doing it in our way. And I think that bridge is really helpful, and it's a useful tool in a lot of scenarios at festivals or, when you're not playing your own show, you don't assume those people are fans of you. So you want to, kind of reach out and say, hey, you know this song, check out the way we do it,
Nice. Well, one of the live staples of Blues Traveler is the annual 4th of July show at Red Rocks, which has happened every year since 1994, with the exception of 1999 due to John's health and 2020 due to COVID. The band takes up shop and offers really unique, one-of-a-kind set lists, full album playthroughs, and other momentous live moments. Can you talk about what this tradition means to the band?
Yeah, Red Rocks is like the cornerstone of our year. It's really a keystone. It's probably our most important gig and our favorite gig to play. It's an amazing place. It's always a great crowd. We have the longest running tenure of any single event night at Red Rock. I mean, it's something like 30 years, with the exception of that one year where John couldn't. And it's a real, big deal. We take that really seriously and try to vary it as much as we can. We've done a lot of different things. We've done some, if it's the anniversary of an album, we've done like doing the album. But I think we're over that because it's like that ends up being like you play maybe 3 or 4 of the songs on any given album we play regularly, but the others we don't. So we play it front to back live, but having never rehearsed the other songs. So you end up with a couple songs that are a little bit flat in there that are just kind of like, oh, crap. So we try to, I think now we're trying to just make it as cool an experience as we can, unless there's a big anniversary that John really wants to try to celebrate. I think it's, it's kind of our most important show. And there's a legacy there of kind of, that was one of the big first shows the band ever did as far as like big places that meant a lot to them.
Well, selfishly, I'm going to bring up my favorite Blues Traveler gig of all time because that was June 2nd, 2009, when I had the honor and privilege of opening for you guys at the Bergen Pack in Englewood. And it was one of the most memorable musical experiences for me because I got to share the stage with a band that I admire. Now, my question to you is there a band that you have ever shared the bill with personally where you left the stage with that feeling of, man, I can't believe we got to share the stage with blank?
Yeah. For me, oddly enough, it was, there were several times, that we had played or opened that I was just like, this is awesome. But on like some festivals, like we Blues Traveler doesn't really go out. I think Train and then maybe Bare Naked Ladies were like the only time we've ever gone out as like a precursor, an opener. And so with Blues Traveler, it didn't happen that much. I mean, we'd share a stage at a festival. Oddly, for me, like the most meaningful was, well, there were 2. Personally, I played with John Popper Project, and we did this thing where Taj Mahal was on stage at Warren's Christmas Jam, and I was just, I love Taj Mahal. So it was, and my dad had passed away just before, so it was like I was in an emotional set, and just meeting Taj and that personally was like, whoa. But the other one was Ziggy Marley. When he sat in with us and we played with Ziggy on tour, there was something just so amazing about him singing the Bob Marley song, No Woman No Cry, that blew me away. And it just gave me shivers while we were rehearsing it. And then on stage, I was just like, oh my God, that's something about that, the timbre of his voice and the song and the place, it all came together. And that really was like an honor to be a part of that. Even though it wasn't an opening gig necessarily, but, it was one of those things where I was just like, duh. And then on a personal note, when like O'Teal sat in and jams with us, and he and I are trading licks and Victor Wooten, those were like, I'm not worthy kind of moments.
I get it. Now in 2021, the band released an album entitled Traveler's Blues. The title, awesome, by the way. A collection of blues cover songs such as Sun Seal's Funky Bitch, which jam band fans also know as a popular song in the Fish universe, as well as a blues rock rendition of Gnarls Barkley's massive hit, Crazy, featuring Rita Wilson and John Schofield. And that album also featured guests like Chris Stone, Kingfish Ingram, Warren Haynes, Keb Mo. Can you talk about that full circle moment for the band doing an actual straight up blues album?
Yeah, that was pretty surreal to be. We were joking about the whole time going in, like, we're actually playing blues. So, we all kind of, listened to a bunch of blues songs and obviously the ones that we did, but we tried to what was hard is not to go like super bluesy with it and try to maintain just playing kind of our roles in our rendition of it. Obviously, we don't profess to be, blues guys. I mean, obviously, John, I could easily see as, but we're not, that's not our forte. And it was, a little humbling to get in. And when you get into the minutia of some of the blues stuff, it's like what they're not playing is what's cool about it. And we're more of like everyone's playing, and it's a cacophony of, a lot of people jamming in the mid range. And it was really interesting. And that's why I said it, like, humbling to kind of peel back and be like, wow, it's when they're not playing, it's the space that makes blues so cool. And it's no choices, as opposed to not a flurry of notes. And in going through the recording, it was really kind of fun to go through that process and learn about the blues in that sense.
Well, now the band has just released Traveler's Soul, the sequel in part to Traveler's Blues, which features the band's take on soul classics, such as the lead single Fool for You, which was originally written by Curtis Mayfield and performed by The Impressions. And you guys took some liberties with the original recording, making it a unique Blues Traveler song, as well as a rounded reimagining of that classic track. Now, even though soul has always been a part of Blues Traveler's mindset, because a song like Money Back Guarantee from Bastardos immediately comes to my mind, this is the first time it's the focus of an entire Blues Traveler album. So can you talk about the mindset behind that around what songs you guys chose?
Yeah, it was kind of a continuation. The idea kind of from the get-go with the record company who kind of presented it to us is that we do like 3 different genres over 3 albums. And the blues one, we just picked blues randomly and then kind of went through trying to curate which songs we want to do. And again, it comes down to, there's some vocal kind of, that's the centerpiece, is like, will John be able to and get into singing this? And so that did pretty well in our, I kind of came out well for us. We felt that it was cool. And so we then picked soul as like kind of the next genre. And it was kind of the same process. Everyone kind of picked through some of their favorites and threw it into a pool. We had, kind of a thread, and with the producer and the record company and the band, and just kind of built a list, and then kind of took away things that wouldn't work necessarily. And then kind of looked into the keys and see, kind of how they all fit together. And just, it's as simple as that. It's, we kind of went with like the ones we want to do.
Well, the band offers their take on D-Light's classic Groove is in the Heart, which features Liv Warfield from Prince's New Power Generation. Now, the original is a funk bass masterclass from the legendary Bootsy Collins. And as a bass player to another one, not only did you step to the plate on this one, dude, you hit a friggin' home run, because it feels like you're tipping the hat to Bootsy, but you're also adding your unique style of playing to this song. I'd love to know what your mindset was walking into approaching an iconic bass line without changing it so much that you take away from the heart of the song.
Yeah, that was an interesting one. That was John. John contributed that. He just liked the song, and we were like, well, yeah, it's a badass song, but how are we going to do it, And me and Shan just sat down and said, hey, this is how we'll play the riff, because it can be played kind of a couple different ways. And I didn't know if the producer was just going to loop it or we'd actually play it. And it ended up, me and Shan played the riff just straight through. So that's all just live, playing the riff over and over and over. And, after one take, you basically have it. And, Bootsy's, is phenomenal. And it kind of came together pretty good. And kind of, we shifted just slightly, because there's some soul feels you just can't get, you just don't have it in you. And I think it was just slightly shifted, but it was super fun to lay down and then afterward be like, oh, nice. It started to build, that's one of the songs, like DJs and loop-based creators, you have to have a vision and know that where you start, it's going to get more dynamic as you go along.
Well, while we're talking about quote unquote groove, let's pivot over to the band's take of King Floyd's 1970s top 10 hit, Groove Me. This one stuck out to me because of the pocket that you guys slid into, along with how balanced the horn section was underneath John's vocals. And then you add in some very tasty solos from Chan and John. This to me was a standout track on the album. Now, as a live fan, I'm kind of curious, that horn section brought something to the song that made me think, I think about Blues Traveler tracks like Go Outside and Drive. I mentioned Money Back Guarantee. I think about The Wolf is Bumpin' from 2018's Hurry Up and Hang Around. I could hear a horn section in a Blues Traveler live show. Is there any chance that's ever going to happen?
We always enjoy the horn sit-ins. Like on the road, we were out with Vanessa Collier in the fall, I believe. Or no, I think it was the spring. yeah, whenever we play with someone with a horn, it always just is a great sit-in. We always enjoy it. Usually we'll have one song and then be like, yeah, do another. I mean, and it pairs really well with the harmonica playing. And, I would love to. We've thought about it in the past, but then it's a couple more people touring, and, it just logistically hasn't worked out, but we would love to have a couple horns, a three-piece would be fantastic, but that's something I think we've talked about, but we've never really committed to doing it.
Well, you mentioned something earlier, and it would not be my radio personality to not touch on this a little bit more. We have Traveler's Blues. We have Traveler's Soul. What is the return of the Jedi to this trilogy? What genre of music will you be tackling next?
It is not certain. I would tell you, actually, if we knew. We don't. As of now, we're not. We haven't committed to what the third installation will be. Hopefully, It's not jazz.
I was going to say it could be Traveler's Dubstep, maybe.
Yeah. Something. But it might be. We might in the next. We've talked about some kind of dance stuff, and maybe that would be a cool way to go. Get some electronic producers and see if that would be something that would work. But we're open-minded, and we're having a blast doing these things. So it's great to be able to pull apart these iconic songs and things, and listen to things. Kind of the analytics of how these songs fit together and stuff it's really fun.
Well, I am looking forward to finding out what that third album is. But for my last question, Tad, if you had to sum up Blues Traveler's musical legacy in 3 songs, which 3 would you choose?
Ooh. Let me see. I think I'd go But Anyway, just because I think it's an iconic song of the beginning of Traveler, and it really identifies with what was the strengths of the band. I think Pretty Angry is one in there because it tells the story of what happened,
Yeah.
And it's such a moving song. I think that has a role there. You were asking what 3 songs, and then for me, I would go back to Reach Me because it's my favorite song to play with, just because it's just fun to play, and it's on a personal level, it's my involvement and joining of the band. So those 3 things kind of are kind of important if you're looking at a timeline and kind of the history of the band. Those 3 would stand out to me.
Well, Tad, this has been an absolute honor to have you on the show. Thank you so much for the many amazing live concerts. And more importantly, thank you so much for joining me tonight on My Weekly Mixtape. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Oh, dude, thank you so much. It was great talking. If we play anything, if we're through Jersey, please get in touch with me. Come say hi backstage.
Certainly will.
Yeah, please do.
And to all the mixtapers out there, thank you so much for listening. Remember to head to myweeklymixtape.com to hear the full catalog of My Weekly Mixtape episodes. And if you like what you're hearing on the show, you can help me out by either telling a friend, leaving the show a 5-star review wherever you're tuning in, or becoming a Patreon mixtaper at patreon.com/myweeklymixtape. That's all for this week. Thanks again for listening. And until next time, enjoy the tunes.